Alrighty, all you cool cats and kittens. So in this video, we're going to be going through activity 133, and basically we're just going to be talking about constraints in CAD software. Now, a constraint, what is a constraint? You've probably heard me talking about this semester already, but basically a constraint is a limitation or a restriction. So an example of this real quick that I'm going to show you in another part studio would be like two lines that are in a sketch that are maybe perpendicular. So I could come in here, right, I could create a sketch, I could create one line here from the origin. Remember, we do want to always start from the origin with our sketches. But then I could come in here again, and then I could create another drawing right here, right? So now, these two lines right here, as you can see, this is a horizontal line, this is a vertical line. Now, the constraint that I could apply between these two would be that I would make them perpendicular to each other, right? So now, this line and this line, they're perpendicular to each other. So if I try to drag them, right, or try to move them, even the fact that they are horizontal here, or this line's always horizontal and then this line is always vertical, that is also a constraint, right? So as you can see, I deleted that, and then now, as you can see, I can move this around, but even then, whenever I'm moving this around, these two lines are always going to remain perpendicular to each other. Now, if I put this back, you'll see to the right of my cursor, there's that horizontal line, right? Now check that out. Now these have these black lines on here because this line's always going to be vertical and this line's always going to be horizontal. However, these points are blue because I can still move those around, right? Another example would be another line, maybe intersecting one of these lines. So what if I did this, put this line right here? What I could do is I could dimension this out, right? So I could use a dimensional constraint is what this is called. And I could put 30 degrees in there. Now this line's always going to remain 30 degrees away from that other line. I can move it, right? But it's always going to remain 30 degrees from this line. So there's always going to be that 30 degrees in there. Okay. Finally, also, 2 points that are coincident. What it means if it's coincident means that they're always going to be at the same place. So basically, if I have this line right here, right, and then let's say that I create another line, so it maybe goes right here, and then it ends right here. As you can see, there's that orange little square around there, and then there's also that coincident icon. Now, if you never know what any of those icons are, if you hover over it, you can kind of see what it looks like, right? So it's right there. What you can also do is if you click this drop down, you can see it. So it's coincident, and then it's going to tell you, make two or more sketch entities share the same location in the sketch, right? So just as we said, I can move this as much as I want, but that point of this line and the point of this line, they're always going to be sharing the same location, okay? So it's just a little bit of an intro and an example. And in that, what we saw is that there are geometrical constraints, which deal with the geometry of lines or just any geometric entity. But basically, the example of a geometric constraint would be like this line and this line being perpendicular to each other. A dimensional constraint, however, would be like if I end up taking this and I put on here, maybe this is going to be 20 millimeters, right? So then that would be a dimensional constraint. Even this right here, 30 degrees, how this line occurs 30 degrees from this line, dimensional constraint as well. Okay, so this is especially important in CAD software that we're setting up good dimensional constraints as well as geometrical constraints, especially during the beginning of a design. Now, particularly, this is important in parametric models. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to erase everything that I've done basically so far. And what I'm going to show you real quick is basically how we can end up creating variables. So I'm going to call this height. That's what I'm going to do. So I just went right in here and then I end up creating a variable table, right? Now for this value, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this as, let's go with 20 millimeters, okay? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this dimension or this variable is created first before I actually create the sketch. And so what I can do is I can actually reference this variable value. So now what I can do is I could create a rectangle, let's say. So I'm going to actually use the center point rectangle so that it's centered along this origin point. And what I'm going to actually do here is I'm going to type in here, first I got to put a number in, and then I can do this hashtag, and then I'm going to put hashtag height, right? So I'm going to click that. Now what I can do is I can use that variable. So what this height is actually 20 millimeters now. Now if I hover over this again here, what I'm going to do is I just tried pressing that hashtag button, so that's what happens. That's why you got to enter just a number first, and then erase it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this height times 2. Now, what is this going to make this? It's going to make this 40 millimeters, right? And so now this is always going to be where this is double the height, where the width is double the height of this, okay? Now, if I end up coming back in here, maybe I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm going to actually change this to 30 millimeters. Then we could do that. Press the green check mark again, see how that increased in size. Check this out. I'm going to go back down to 20. Watch it get smaller again. So green check mark. Boom. There you go. So that is something very important. We're going to be working with that parametric modeling there. Now, just as a reminder, parametric modeling is where geometry is created with association to other geometry. This is where this width is twice the size of our height, right? Now, fully constraining a sketch, it's important because if we don't end up completely defining the geometry of a sketch, unexpected things will happen. So in this case right here, whenever I go to this sketch, do you see how all of these sides are black in here? Nothing is blue, right? If everything's black in here, then that's a good thing. It means it's fully constrained, right? Most of the time, that is what we want. Now, what I'm going to show you as well is an example of a sketch that is not fully constrained. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and while I'm creating this, you're probably going to see some automatic geometric constraints that are being added, right? You see that horizontal one, you see this one's a vertical one, right? Then we can come over here, then we'll see these. If I put it right here, this would have been vertical to this origin point, right? So I'm just going to move it up here. Then maybe I come up here, vertical constraint, horizontal constraint again. That is a constraint that's trying to make this end point of this line horizontal to this. So we're going to bring that down a little bit. Maybe we go over here, horizontal, and then I'm going to go right here, and then this is horizontal again, and then we go right here, right? Now, as you can see, this line right here, black, right? Can't move it. That's a good thing because that means that that line is fully constrained. This, however, not fully black, right? So now, in the case, maybe we need to create some part, right? Now, how this part's set up right now, is this good? No, because we can change a whole lot of things about this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some constraints in here, and then you can see how we establish that process of fully constraining a sketch. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to actually come in here, and I'm going to make sure that this is 20 millimeters. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to make sure that this guy is 15 millimeters. What I'm going to also do is I'm going to throw an equal constraint. Now the equal constraint, we haven't talked about that yet, that makes two sides equal to each other. So this side is also going to be 15 millimeters. What I also want to do is I want to make sure that this line right here is vertical. And then what I also want to do is I want to make sure that this line and this line, I want to make sure that those are perpendicular to each other. Okay? I'm going to do that, perpendicular. Now, one thing that I do want to show you all is how we can get errors. So now notice how I just said that this line needs to be perpendicular to this line. If I would end up trying to make these two lines parallel to each other now, that would basically throw us an error. So as you can see, it's a sketch cannot be solved, right? Because it's impossible for two lines to be vertical as well as perpendicular, right? So what I could do is I could come in here and I can click on one of these parts. So it'll always show up the parts that you're having issues with, they'll always show up red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this guy and then delete. Okay, so then now those are perpendicular to each other once again. Another thing that we're going to want to do is we'll want to also dimension out. Let's go ahead and let's dimension this guy out too. 15 millimeters, what this wants to be, 15 millimeters. And then also what I want is my overall height. I want this guy to right here to be 45 millimeters. So then now we have that set up correctly. Another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a construction line as well. Now with this construction line, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this midpoint ends up going right over this center here. Okay. So then now what we can do is I'm going to throw a vertical constraint on this, so that now the midpoint of this will end up going over that. And then as you can see here, this line, this line, this line all became black. Also this line over here also black. That means that those entities are fully constrained. Now what I'm going to end up doing is I'm also going to end up applying an equal constraint. Now the equal constraint is going to be this guy and this guy. We want those parts to be equal to each other. Now as you can see that this is fully constrained, this is fully constrained. What we also want to do is we want to make sure that these two parts are equal to each other. And then what we also want to end up doing is we also want to make sure, did we make sure that this part is equal to this part? Let's see. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, we did do that already. Another thing that I want to do is I want to throw a dimension down here. So from this point to this point right here, basically we want 100 millimeters right there. Okay. And then also another constraint that I'm going to throw on this is I actually do want this to be going in here so that this is actually 45 degrees from the horizontal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dimension this out. So I'm going to go right here to here. Now this should be 180 minus 45 degrees, right? Because this is supposed to be 45 degrees. If I have 45 degrees here, we add that to 135, that's going to equal 180, right? Because from this point on right here, it's just for a straight line, it has 180 degrees in between it, right? So that's why we got 45 degrees here. We have to subtract 45 from 180. That's how we get 135 there. Okay, so now this sketch entity that I created is basically fully constrained. I can try to click, I can try to drag all I want. The whole thing, everything in here, all sketch entities, all geometric entities of this, they're all black, right? So that means that it is fully constrained. So in this case, this sketch right now, fully constrained. Okay? In conclusion, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to open up a new notepad. I'm going to leave some notes in here. In conclusion, what did we learn? Well, we learned that a constraint is a limitation or restriction, right? We gave some examples. They were perpendicular lines, also lines that intersect another at 30 degrees, two beginning points of lines that are coincident, right? Those are the two examples we went over at the very, very beginning. We also talked about the two different types of constraints. Those two different types of constraints, those are dimensional constraints as well as geometrical constraints. If I go in here, an example of a dimensional constraint would be that this top line, 20 millimeters, right? It's 20 millimeters wide. If I would end up going on to here, you'll see that this has a horizontal geometric constraint. That would be a geometric constraint example. Okay. The other things that we talked about, remember, constraints, very, very important in CAD software, particularly in parametric modeling. Now, what is parametric modeling? Remember, parametric modeling is modeling where geometry is created with association to other geometry. So you've got that. And then what we did in there was, remember, we did that rectangle example where the width was twice the amount of the height. The amount of height we'll put on there. Okay, so that's another thing that we went through. Also, fully constraining a sketch. Remember, that is important because if we don't completely define the geometry of our sketch, then unexpected things will happen, right? So we want to make sure that unexpected doesn't happen and that all of the changes that we make are going to be predictable results, right? Now, the last and final thing that we showed you was just how to create a fully constrained sketch in there as well. All right. So I hope that was helpful. If you've got any questions, please, please, please feel free, drop a comment in the comment section. As always, please remember, like and subscribe. Don't forget, you can also hit that notification for, or the bell for notifications for videos, new video drops. But anyways, hope that was helpful. I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.